Hey guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 52nd episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what impact it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. It's been a while since I've touched on any West Coast albums, and now that I've knocked out most of the essential G-Funk albums that were dominating the charts at the time, I can now tackle some albums that came from these similar places but took a very different approach. The further along that hip hop progressed, the more new artists would emerge that didn't want to be bound to their city's designated sound. While there's obviously a number of classics that fit that mold and still found plenty of success, sales and popularity wise, they weren't on the level of The Chronic or Doggy Style, obviously, so I felt like I should get those out of the way first. This put groups like Pharcyde in kind of a compromising position because you'll sometimes hear the word underground thrown around for acts like this, but at the same time, they still had tons of impact and critical acclaim. They were in a similar movement to groups like Freestyle Fellowship, Souls of Mischief, Alcoholics, and Razkaz, just to name a few, where they mixed their West Coast influences and experiences with the more boom bap driven sound and style of New York. They all did this in completely different ways, but the kind of commonality between them is that none of them felt restrained to the area they grew up in, which is something I touched on in my previous videos. While their debut album, Bizarre Ride to the Far Side, is usually looked at as their magnum opus, their second album, Lab Cabin California, has some of the best songs that Farside has to their name, like Run In or Drop, which was actually produced by a young and relatively unknown Jay Dilla. He did do the beat for De La's Stakes is High the same year, though, and those beats alone give you a pretty good idea of just how impressive De La's discography is, considering those beats came before anyone even really knew him. Also, the music video for Drop is easily a top 5 music video in hip hop for me, and whenever the topic of dope creative music videos comes up, the Drop video is virtually always the first one that pops into my head. But that album is slightly more mature and tight, whereas the debut I've always felt is perfectly represented by its album cover and title. For me, I would always listen to this album picturing myself on this metaphorical roller coaster, riding along through the twists and turns of the world they were building. I feel like the diversity and personality of each member adds on to the idea that this is a journey where each distinct voice is a different character you get more familiar with throughout the album. And speaking of the members, they were comprised of Fat Lip, Imani, Slim Kid 3, and Booty Brown. Their original DJ was Jay Swift, who was later replaced by Dilla, but he did do the bulk of the production here with help by LAJ and Slim Kid. One of the big things Bizarre Ride to the Far Side excels with is using comedy to create a colorful, light atmosphere. This isn't an especially dark and grimy album, but it also isn't some Will Smith album where everything is played completely safe to appeal to the widest possible audience. To me, it feels like they went this lighter direction due to personal preference and to help fill a hole in hip hop that a lot of people probably didn't even realize was there yet. You also really have to give a tip of the hat to Shock G and the Digital Underground because, to my knowledge, they were the first truly successful kind of West Coast acts to come with a more East Coast inspired sound. But what's so great about albums like Bizarre Ride to the Far Side is despite their clear reverence for the golden age hip hop before them, they're still boundary pushing and not afraid to experiment. You have to keep in mind that this is 1992, so there was no Illmatic, there was no Ready to Die, no All Eyes on Me, even The Chronic wouldn't drop until later in the year. I've always felt that albums like this one kind of show that the way we divide up musical decades, especially when it comes to hip hop, isn't necessarily accurate. Where we lump 80s hip hop into one group and then 90s hip hop into another. In reality, a lot of classics from 1990 to 92 feel closer to 89 than they do to 99, but we're so used to just picturing 80s music one way and 90s music another, and it's the same with the early and late 2000s. This isn't a bad thing when it comes to the actual quality of the albums themselves. When I was younger and getting into this album, for some reason I had just assumed it was from the 80s, but it didn't hinder my enjoyment at all. It feels more like they took all the best aspects of Golden Age hip hop and delivered them in this fun, conceptual journey full of food for thought, humor, and most of all, personality. Overall, when you're talking about the LA underground rap scene and just kind of artistic, creative, alternative rap in general, you really can't not mention the Pharcyde. They were a key piece of the puzzle that was also being put together by Project Blowed, Liquid Crew, Hieroglyphics, Anticon, and even underground movements from New York like Raucous Records. The skits on here are hilarious and just as creative as the songs, which often feature entertaining, personable stories on top of the jazzy left field beats that get stuck in your head. I'm gonna leave out the skits for honorable mentions, just because I normally do, and I feel like any good skit is kind of better suited in the context of the album. That being said, the tracks that I love that just didn't make the top three include That Type of Person, Soul Power Remix, On the DL, Officer, Your Mama, Other Fish, and Return of the B-Boy. That would leave my three overall favorites as Oh Shit, For Better or For Worse, and Passing Me By. Thank you for watching my 50-second video. Be sure to check for the next video to see which New York classic I'm gonna pull, as well as like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and let me know what your favorite songs are off this staple of LA hip-hop. Don't forget to have a happy holiday, and I'll see you guys next time, okay? Alright.